Aloha and welcome to this video where we will be creating our front end for our Express API that we've created. And our front end is going to be a website created with Vue. So what our goal is that we'll be able to have a sign up page where we'll sign up a user. And you can see that if the user's already been signed up, we'll get an error message back so that we know that they're already signed up. But let's go ahead and try to come up with a user that hasn't been created before. So instead of Bob, we'll create Bobby and we'll sign up. And now that worked. And so now we can log in as Bobby. And you can see that on this home page, just for a little bit of debug, you wouldn't actually want to do this in a production app. I'm displaying the JWT token that I got back after they logged in. And so this token can now be sent with Ajax requests as we load the data for our application. And then I've created this posts page that uses that token to pull out the posts and display them on our blog only if they're logged in. Now, if they log out and they try to go to that post URL, you can see that we have an error loading the posts. So I'll do a simple demo on setting this all up. Now I'm starting with the Express API that I've done in the Secure API video before. And we have some open routes that you don't need any authentication. That's for our sign up and our login routes. And then we have some protected routes for our blog posts model. And these can be only be accessed if the user is logged in or they sent a JWT token that identifies which user they are. Now, if you notice, I am appending /API to the front of each of these routes. Now, I'm doing that because I have a website that's running under the same domain name. And so if it's /posts is my API route, then my website can't use /posts for the website. So I'm storing all of my API underneath this /API. So if you're following along, you might want to make sure your routes do that as well. And another thing you want to do is make sure that your routes are RESTful. So notice this is a posts route right here. And to get all posts, this is the route to make all posts. And we do a post request on this route versus a get request gets all of our posts. And a post creates a new post. And then to get a single post, we add the ID on the end. To update a post, we make sure we have that ID on the end and we send a patch request. So it's the same URL that we're using for both getting and patching, but we're only doing that for the only difference is this is a get request on this URL and this is a patch. Now, it really doesn't matter that I called the parameter a different name. The URL is /API that we had from our index file /posts /some ID. So the URL will be the same, but which method gets called will depend on if we're doing a get request or a patch request. So review all your routes, and again, the delete will use the same URL, but we'll do a delete request. So go through all your routes and make sure that they are RESTful routes. And that will help set us up for us to be able to create the web page that we're going to do next. Now, one thing that we do want to do for our API is install the CORS module. That stands for CrossOrigin Requests. So what that allows us to do is to develop our front end on one domain and be able to make requests on it to another domain. And the domains are both going to be running on our computer, but one will be running on a port, say 3000, and the other one will be running on port 8080. So the way I have it set up is my Docker and my Express server is running on port 3000, but my front end is running on port 8080. So those count as a separate domain, and eventually we would want to tie that all in to be running on the same server. But just so we can develop, we need to install this module so that we can make requests over different domain names, which even includes the port. So we're going to go ahead and save that, or npm install. Now remember, this only installs it on our local computer. It does not install it on our Docker container. So we do have to launch up our container by doing a Docker compose up and making sure that our server launches up. And then in a new terminal window, we would need to go docker compose exec, and we want to execute this on the web container. And again, this name comes from our docker compose.yaml file. So we're executing this on the container that's running our Docker Express server. And sh, it just stands for bash, so we'll just get a bash shell on that container. And now we could do npm install, and we can do cores. That way we make sure that this module actually gets installed on our Docker container. After we do that, we probably want to reboot our Docker container. By the way, we can go to our different terminal windows here. This is running Docker compose, so we can do Control-C to stop that, and just Docker compose up to make sure that our server got a nice reboot to make sure that that module's installed. Now back in our main server file, we need to include that new package. And then after our connection to Mongo, it gets established, but before we mount our routes, we want to tell our app to use cores, and that's really all we need to do. Cores will go ahead and make sure that we can accept CrossOrigin requests. Now by saving this file, if you noticed in the video, you saw that my server restarted, and it restarted without any errors, and that's what you want to check to make sure happened. And now we are set up so that our front end that's going to be running on port 8080 can make AJAX requests to this back end that's running on port 3000. Now we don't really need to be running this back end right now, so we can go ahead and kill it, but once we start making requests from our front end to the back end, we will have to launch this back up. Now we're going to go ahead and create our Vue Frontend client. Now I am in the folder, the root of my folder. I'm in this root folder that has the index and the Docker and the Docker compose file. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a new folder called client. And that's I'm calling it client because it's our front side client. Now what we're going to do as we develop is we're going to run a server not on our Docker machines, but we're going to run a server on our local machine, a node server that's going to serve up the client. And it's the same server that would do a Vue client if you're doing a standalone Vue app. And the idea is when we're done, we can compile our entire thing and we can put our HTML and JavaScripts in a folder in here called public. And then our Docker that's serving up our API will also serve up these static files, the HTML and JavaScript, that get generated from our Vue client. But I'm not going to show that part in the video, and if you're following along in my class, I'm not going to have you take that step. But if you did want to take your app into production, there is a way that you could take your Vue app and build it, and it would build all the files and store it in a public folder. And you can configure it to actually store it in the public folder and have your Express API server serve those as public static files. And that's how you would combine everything onto just one domain name and one server. You wouldn't have one server serving your front end and another server serving your backend. Although it might also be a good idea if this app is going to need to scale and take a lot of requests to separate those two servers and have one server serving your HTML front-end client and another server serving up the API. All right, so let's go ahead and create our client. And it's going to ask us some things. Now, if you did a tutorial and it showed you the UI web page, this is kind of the basic thing, the basic way to create a new app, but without the UI, and you can still have all the same options. So we can press up and down arrows, and we can go to manually select features and press enter to say that. And we want the router, so I think if you use the up and down, and you can press the space bar to select the router. And so we want the router, and we want our linter formatter installed. So once we got all of our options, you can press the enter key again, and it says use history mode for router. Yes, we do want to use that, but I'm going to add that in manually just to make sure you see that happen. So I'm going to say no. And then the linter, we're going to go ES linter plus prettier, that option right there. And we will do the lint on save option. And where would you like your thing? Where do you like to place your config? And we could just say dedicated config files in that one. And I'm going to say no, don't worry about saving this for future options. But now, as you can see, it has created a new client folder inside of my app folder. And it's going to go ahead and download all of the Vue components and everything that it depends on. And then after it's done, you can cd into the client and do npm run serve. So cd into our client and npm run serve. And it's starting up a development server, and it might take some time the first time, but now you can see that empty app at localhost :3000. So opening that up in a browser will bring you to the Vue page for an initial application with a home and about link. Now by right-clicking and inspecting an element or going to the tools and pulling up the inspector, you can bring up this. Now, whenever you have an error, I highly recommend that you click this console and see what JavaScript errors you might have. I also highly recommend installing the Vue tools so that you can help debug your app that way. And that will help you a lot. So whenever things don't work the way you think they are, make sure you check this console tab and the Vue. And of course, you can always do a console.log to log out some information to see why your app might not be working. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to clean up this app so it doesn't have any of the generic Vue stuff that you get from a new Vue app in it, and then work on our navigation bar so that we have a home page, an about page, and then a sign up and login links. Now I did a lot of work off camera to set up that navigation. The first thing I did is in my main app.vue file, I modified the template to get rid of the navigation that was in there and created a new component called the navigation that will contain all of our navigation. The other thing that I did is I added this onto the path so that we can use history mode. So if we didn't do that, our pages wouldn't update when we switched routes. So you can see from the script tag that I am now importing the navigation and registering the navigation component. And then I have the style. It had a lot more style in there that dealt with the navigation, so I took all that out, and now we just have the normal app style right there. Now, one thing to note that all of these changes are happening in the client folder that is our Vue app. We're not going to change anything else in our Express API server. So, and then in our source folder, there is our components folder, and I added a new one called the navigation.vue. So in that, I set up our basic navigation. So you can see that we have a nav tag instead of a div tag. We have our logo, and then we have a UL tag to store all of our links. And then we create a router link, and notice I'm using named routes here for home, about, sign up, and login. And then the navigation style that was in my app.vue file where the navigation used to be, I copied that into my style for the navigation, and I have it scoped so it's only for the navigation tag. The only thing that I did need to add was this nav UL that gets rid of the dots, because I'm doing my navigation slightly different than the template that we started with. So by doing list style type none, we get rid of the dots. Then in my router file, in the index file, I added in a route for both the sign up and the login route. These two already existed before. The about had some comments that I took out. But then down below, I configure my router to now have a history mode, and then the routes right here is just this array of routes. And then in my views, I have my about view, I have my home view that I modified. Those two are already there, and I added two new ones, a login and a sign up view. Now I didn't change the about view at all from the template, but my home view, I took out the component, that home page component. So in fact, this hello world component that was in there, we're not going to use it, so we can go ahead and delete that hello world view or component, because we're not going to use it anymore. And as you can see, my login, they're just a basic template that only has an H2 tag in it, and my sign up has that as well. So make sure you refresh that, and now you can see that I have my home page and an about page, a sign up page, and a login page. So hopefully you followed all of those changes, and now we're ready to start creating forms for users to sign up for our app and to log in. So now in the sign up view, I created a simple form where someone can fill out their email and a password and click sign up. And of course it wants me to have a valid email, and click sign up. And I don't really do anything now except for post a message saying I should send data to the API. You can also see I've also logged out a message on my console that I can see, and that kind of helps me debug and see what's happening. So now I have a new form saying it's a sign up form, and when they submit it, we don't want it to refresh the page. We want it to call the handle sign up method, which I have defined down below. Now if there's a message, we'll go ahead and print the message out, and that's where it says I should send data to API. And now we have a form, a couple of inputs right here that use an email and password to store their fields, and a submit button. And we can look down here. The data that we're going to have submitted, and at first it's going to be false, and that's going to disable our submitted button when they click the button until we get our data sent to the server and then back. That way they don't keep clicking the submit button, sending more requests to our server. And then we have a message, email, and password that all start off as blank. And now my handle sign up method, you can see this is where I log something out to the console, and then I update the message that shows up on the page up here. So now let's update this handle sign up button to be able to do a little bit of validation. We're going to make sure that they have an email and a password sent. And if they do, I'm going to still do this send data to API. If they don't, I am going to send a message saying the email and password is required, and then also re-enable the submit button so they can submit the form after they fix their problems. So testing that out, when they click sign up when the fields are empty, or when one field is empty, you'll see that it says email and password required, and it won't let them sign up until they have both. And then when it does, it says I should send data to the API. Now I kill my server by pressing Control-C, and now I can install Axios, which will allow us to send AJAX requests to our server and then get the responses back. So we're going to install that, npm install Axios save. Now make sure you are in the client folder when you do that, because you do not need this on your Express app that serves your API. We just need it in our Vue app that is going to make the requests. And so because of that, since Axios isn't getting served off of your Express app, you do not need to go into the Docker console and install it either. This is just getting installed locally inside of the client app that we're making right now. And now we can start our server with npm run serve again, and hopefully everything should launch up and we're back and running again. And as you can see, all my pages still work. Now, once again, always inside of the client, I created a new folder called Services. And inside of there, I have auth.js. Now, this is where all of the code that communicates with our backend is going to go. So these are going to make API calls to our backend and get the data back. And as you can tell, in my auth.js, I created this. Now, for now, we are running our Express server on port 3000, and that's getting run through Docker. And then we have an API /auth, and the way I set it up is /API /auth /signup is the endpoint that creates a new user. So now I have this method that you can call, and you pass in a user object that has an email and a password, and it will go ahead and make that HX request and hit our Express backend. And then if it's successful, we'll log out that it returned success and send the user that our backend gave us back. And if it's not successful, we'll log out that it was a failure, and then we'll do this reject. Now, if you're new to promises, you might have seen this then and catch and use that often in your code. But we're also going to return a promise. So, what we're doing is we're fulfilling our promise. When we call resolve, after our AJAX request has succeeded, when we call resolve, we, as we promised, are calling the resolve function that they pass to us. And if it doesn't work, we call the reject function. So that's how promises work, is when we create a promise and send it back, then they can give us two functions to call, one on success, one on failure, and we are promising to call it whenever our operation finishes. So now make sure that you also export your class. Now this is a static method, meaning we don't have to instantiate an instance of this class to be able to call this method, where they can just export this class and then they can call methods on it. Now I did notice that I accidentally put the services in the same, just inside the client folder, but it is part of our source code, so we really should drag it into the source folder so that it's in the same folder as our assets, components, and views. So now back in our sign up view, we can go ahead and import that service that we just created. Remember, this @ means the source folder. So then in the services folder, we'll import that file, the auth file. And now in our method, as long as we know that the email and password has been sent, we can go ahead and call this sign up method. And we'll pass it the email and password they filled in. And then if it's successful, we'll log out the user and update the message saying user created. If it's not successful, then it will log out the error message, and then we'll assume that the message is that the email has already been taken, and that's why it's failed, but that's not always necessarily the case. That's why I'm logging this out, so I can look in the console and see what happened exactly. And then finally, I'll say submitted equals false so that they can come up with a new email and sign someone else up. So let's go ahead and try this out. So if we fill it in with an email and a password, we'll click sign up, and we can see that it failed with a 404 error. Well, that's because, as you can tell, also the URL is a little bit messed up here. As you can tell, our server isn't actually running on port 3000. My Docker server hasn't been up. Now you might be running yours, but we need to launch our Docker server to be able to respond to these requests. Now to fix that URL, I was missing a colon here, so it didn't get the quite the right URL, but let's go ahead and also start our Docker server. So when you show your terminal, we can open a new terminal right here. And in this terminal, make sure we're not in our client folder anymore. We can go ahead and launch our Docker server by running docker compose up. So now you can see that my server is started. So in one window, I have Docker running, and in another terminal window, I have on my local machine, I have the npm server, the node server serving up my client app. Now, back inside of my Express server, I noticed when I required the cores that I forgot to include the parentheses to make this a function call right here. And if you do that, your server just stops responding to requests. So go ahead and make the change, and when you save, make sure your server restarts. So now that we have all that all fixed and connected, let's go ahead and try to sign up a user. And you can see that this request failed with status code 400. And that is assuming that the email has already been taken. And you can look at this post right here and see a little bit about it. Now, unfortunately, because we are doing cross-origin requests, we don't necessarily get the back or the body of the bad requests back, where we can do a little bit more debugging. But you can see in my code, whenever I try to sign up a user with the same email or an email that's already been taken, that my service returns a 400 status code right there. So let's go ahead and try to sign up a user that hasn't been created before. And we'll click sign up, and you can see that the service returns success, and we're able to see the email and the hashed password that we gave back to the user. So we are now creating users. Now, just to make sure you have a good idea of everything that's going on, the code that we're writing in the client folder and running on our local machine is actually code that's running in your browser. The browser is executing this JavaScript. And this auth service right here, the browser, this is generating, your browser is what's generating the request and sending them. And then your Docker Compose, your Express server that's running inside of Docker is running the Express server and responding to your requests on port 3000. So we have a Mongo server running in one Docker container. We have an Express server running in another Docker container. And then in this terminal window right here, we are running a little node server that's just serving up our code that we're writing right here. And that code is not running in a terminal window. It's actually running inside of our browser. Next, we're going to allow, now that users can sign up, we're going to make a login functionality. Now, we're making these changes once again in the client. The only change we make to our Express API server is adding in the cores model that allows for cross-origin requests. So in the auth, under our services folder in our auth file, we'll create a new login function that can get called, that will make a request with an email and password to log in. And if it's successful, it will resolve the request and pass back the token, the JWT token that our Express API gives back when you log in. And if it doesn't work, we'll reject the promise and give back the error message. Now we can create a login form on the login view under our views folder. that has an email and a password for them to fill in, and it works a lot like the sign up form. And we're going to call handle login when they submit it, and if there's any messages, we'll print out that message. So we do need to include if equals message here, so that it only shows up if there is a message. And then down below, we do want to use that auth service to call the sign up function. But for now, we'll just make sure the logic works, that when they click submit, we'll set submitted equal to true. We'll check for an email and a password. Then we'll send a request. Right now, I'm just going to do a log message to make sure this works. And if not, if they missed an email or a password, we'll give a message and say submitted equals false so they can resubmit. And make sure you spell message right. And you can see when I click login and either my email or password are blank, we get this email and password required. But if we go ahead and try to log in someone and we click login, we could see that it says sending request. Of course, the form is now disabled until that request comes back, and that's just so they don't submit it a whole bunch of times and we fire off a whole bunch of requests, and it's just taking a while. So now we'll go ahead and call that auth service when they click login. So if there's an email and a password, we'll go ahead and call that login method that we created before. And then if it succeeds, we'll go ahead and log out a token and print out a message that they're logged in. If it fails, we'll catch the error, and we'll just assume that it's an invalid email or password and re-enable the submit button so they can try again. So now we can go ahead and try to log in Bob, and I'll do a wrong password first, and you can see that my service gives an unauthorized error, and we have the invalid email and password. And then we'll go ahead and try it with a correct password. And you can see that we have down here the JWT token that came back from my Express API, and my web page is saying I'm logged in. Now, of course, we haven't actually changed the state of anything because the JWT token, if I refresh, it's gone, and I can log in again, but that doesn't really do anything for my app right now. So next we have to remember the state of our app and remember that this person is logged in. Now there are a few ways we can remember if someone is logged in. One, we can set a cookie on their browser, and every time that browser makes a request, it will send the cookie to the server, and we can also get that cookie using JavaScript and use that to remember if they're logged in. However, something that works a lot better for single page applications is the local storage. So if you have your debug tab, you can see that we have some local storage, and this is just accessible to the JavaScript running in the browser. This information does not travel to the server and back. But we don't need it to travel to the server and back, because all we need to do is save our token in the local storage, and then whenever we make an API request, we can use the token as authentication to the request so that we can complete the request on Express. Now once we got that token saved in the local storage, we do want that to change the state of our app so that we can know that the user is logged in as they visit various pages within our app. And that's where Vue X comes in. And this might be a little bit overkill for just storing the state of whether or not someone is logged in or not, but it's a good addition to add to our single page application so that we can store other information as well. Now to get Vue X installed, I killed the server that's running my client application, and make sure you're in the client folder because we want this installed on our Vue app. We don't want it installed on our Express server. So we just need to run npm install vuex and save that as a dependency. And after it installs, we can do npm run serve to get our Vue client server started again so we can visit our web page. After we've added Vue X to our app, we can create a store. So inside of the source folder, and make sure it's not at the client level, but under the source folder, we create a new folder called store. And in that folder, we'll create a store.js where we'll create and initialize a Vue X store. So we import Vue and Vue X. We're also going to import our auth service because we're going to hand off sending the login request to the store instead of having the login Vue do it. So this initializes our initial state. So we're going to look in our local storage to see if we already have a JW token there. So our initial state, if there is a token and it's not blank, so this is a ternary operator in JavaScript. So this is a test to see if it's true or false. If we do have a token and it's not blank, then our initial state says we are logged in, and we also store the token in our state. If not, if there is no token, then we're not logged in and there is no token, so that token is null. So then we say view.use Vue X right there. And now we create our store, initialize a new store and make sure we're exporting it. Our state is the initial state that we set up there. And we're going to have one action for now, a login action, and this is a method we can call in our login view. It will go ahead and use the auth service that we used before to pass in an email and password. So we'll make our API request, and if the request comes back from a token, we'll store the token in our local storage, and then we'll commit our login, which is this mutation down here, and then we'll resolve our promise. Now, if the action doesn't work, then we'll just print out that it failed. It's probably they had a wrong email and password, and we'll reject the promise. And then our mutation down here, in our mutations, we have a login that we have a state and a token. So the state, it will be set to true when they log in, and we'll store the token. We'll also have some getters so that we can get this information in the rest of our app. Now the reason why we're using this store is it's a lot easier to just have a store that all of our components and views can use, and they can access this store. It's one central place to store all of our variables instead of trying to pass in properties from one view to another view up to components and etc. It's easier to have one central store for all of that information. So just to make it easier if you're following along to type it, we have a state, we have actions, and that's from here to here. And then we have mutations, and then we have our getters. Now this isn't designed to be a complete tutorial on Vue X. In fact, it's very simple, but just something that if you're trying to build a simple login system that you can add to your app. Now in our main JS file, this is outside of the store and outside of the views, but at the right inside of the source we have our main.js file. We just need to import that store that we created and attach it to our app through here, and then all of our components and views will have access to the store. Now our auth service right here is no longer needed because our store is going to be the one making the API request to log someone in. So we're not going to do it here in the login form, or we're not going to call it directly. We're going to use the store to call it. So now if they have a correct email or they entered in an email and password, we're going to use the store to try to retrieve the JWT token and store it. So we're going to replace this code right here with the code that's going to use the store or the Vue X store that we created instead of do it directly. So since we included this store in the entire app, we can access it with a this.store. And then we'll dispatch the login method that we created inside of the store. So this right here is calling this login method right here, and we're going to pass in the user. So here's the user that has an email and a password. If it succeeds, then we'll just log out that they logged in. And if it doesn't, we'll log out the error and we'll print out a message, or we'll make the message say invalid email and password and re-enable the submit button so they can fix their change and try to submit again. So we can try this out. We'll go ahead and log in Bob with a wrong password. And you can see I'm actually logging out this error message a couple of times, but that failed because we had a wrong password and we get invalid email and password. And now we could go ahead and log in with a correct password. And you can see it logged in. We can even see the token coming back from the request. And now this should be stored in our local storage. So we can see that with our debug tools. We can click on this application and we got this local storage right here, and you see that we have the JWT token stored in our local storage. Now, because we initialized our state by looking to see if this was in our local storage, if we refresh, this app will know that we're logged in because we have this JWT token stored here, and it will set our initial state to being logged in. Now, even though we know we're logged in, there's nothing on our app that shows that we log in. And let's do that in our navigation. If they're logged in, let's hide the sign up and login link, and let's give them a logout link. So we're going to add v-ifs onto these links and have them only show up if they're not logged in. So just separating these out onto different lines so it's easier to read. If the we want to make sure if the store.getters.logged in, if we're logged in, do not show up this sign up link. So I do an exclamation mark in front of that. And also for that's for sign up, and we also want to do that for the login link. So once we save that and we refresh, we see our sign up and login links are gone, and they're gone on every page that we're on. Now, if we do need to debug this, if we have our Vue tools set up, we can switch to our Vue X, and we can click on our base state, and we can see that it's logged in, the state is logged in, and we have the JWT token sitting there ready for us if we need to grab it to make an API request. It might actually be better to put the VFs on the LI tag so we don't have extra LI tags with the links disappearing in them. And then let's go ahead and add another LI tag. So if we are logged in, then make this logout link appear, and we'll just have that call a logout function that we'll implement here in our component. So we'll just add this logout method here down below in a script tag. And what we'll do is we'll dispatch a logout method that we'll write next in our store. And then this will redirect the page to the home page after they logged out. And make sure we call this getters, not just getter. And make sure you call this dispatch. I forgot the C initially, so make sure you put that in there. Then back in the store, we're going to add, we have our login action. We're going to add another action called logout. And it doesn't need any other parameters. We're going to remove the token out of the store. That way, if they refresh the page, the token will end up being null, and they won't have an initial state of being logged in. Instead, they'll be logged out. So we're going to remove the JWT token, and we're going to commit the Logout Mutation, which is kind of like calling this method. So we're going to set our state to false, and we're also going to erase the token out of our state. And so now we can try this. Now we have the logout link that shows up on our navigation. When we click it, we notice the sign up and the login links come back. And when we click on our view and we look at that, we could see that the logout mutation has taken effect. And when we click on that, we see that we have a false state with a null token in it. And now we can go ahead and try to log in again. And by logging in, now we got the new state with our token, and we're logged in. So the next step, we'll be able to get all of our posts from our API route. So now that we have the JWT token, we can make requests on our Express server to get more data out. So next, let's create a new view for our posts. Now that we have users that are logged in and we have the token, we can go ahead and create a page where you can view the posts that have been made. So in this page, we'll just have a message. So if we fail to load the post, we can at least let the user know what's happening. And then we'll loop through an array of posts, printing out the content of each one. And now our data will have an empty array of posts with a message saying loading post. So when the page first loads, they'll see this loading post message. And then we'll have this mounted function that runs when the page loads. And in here is where we'll call our request to make to get all of the posts that are stored in the database. Now in the router folder in the index.js file where we have all of our routes, we'll just add a new route for that new post view that we created. And then in our navigation, we'll create a link to that new view, but we'll only show the view if they're logged in. So this uses the same if for the logout button to make sure that they're logged in before they get the posts, because if they're not logged in, we don't have a token that we can use to connect to log someone in and collect the posts. So now we are logged in, and now we have this posts page, and you can see that in the console we have that log message saying load posts here. And if we log out, we'll see that that post link disappears. Of course, we will have to do a little bit more work to prevent people from just typing in the URL and getting to the page. But since this video is already getting kind of long, I'll leave that for another video. So we'll create a new service to fetch our posts, and this is where we might add other methods to, say, create a post, or delete a post, or update a post, or get just one post. But for now, I'll just have a one function that retrieves all of the posts using Axios. And if you notice, we need to pass in the JWT token. That way we can include it in the headers. That way our request will be authorized. Once we have that file set up, and don't forget to export it at the bottom, then we can go to our post.vue file, and we can update our mounted method to first check to see if we're logged in. If we're not logged in, then we can make our message say you must log in first. We can even push them to the login page, but we might want to have some message showing them why they're on the login page, like you need to log in to see that. But if they are logged in, we'll get the token out of the store. We'll go ahead and use that get post method that I created in the post service, and we'll collect the data, and the data will be our posts. So we'll update the post array with that data, and we'll erase the message. Of course, if it doesn't work, we'll log out the error message, and up on the page we'll see error getting posts. And you can see if I'm not logged in that we did do that load posts here, but it noticed that I wasn't logged in, so I have the message saying you must log in first. So we can click on the login button and go ahead and log in a user. And we see that we are now logged in, so we do have a link to the posts, and log out, and we can click on the posts, and you can see it loads the post's content onto the page. Now, the last thing I'll do in this video is just make it a little bit more user-friendly. This is in the sign up view. After they click submit button, we go ahead and make the message say user created, but then they're still on that page with a disabled submit button. We might as well push them onto another page, and we'll push them to the login route. That way, after they sign up, they'll be on the login page and they can log in. Now, you might want to make this even more user-friendly and go ahead and do the login logic. Right now, you have the email and password they used to sign up, so you can make another request to log in and get the token and log them in. But I'll leave that for you to do on your own. But if you want to, or if you'd rather them just go to the login page, and then on the login page, we can, after they log in, instead of just having them sitting on the login page, we can push them to the home page. And there's much more that you can do to make this more user-friendly, and even protecting our post page so that if they try to visit the post page and they're not logged in, they get redirected to the login page and with a message saying they have to log in. So now we can go ahead and try that. We'll sign up a user that I haven't used before. And we can see now we're on the login page. We could see that that returns success, but now we're on the login page, so we can go ahead and log in that new user. And now we're on the home page after they logged in, and then they can click posts and see the posts. Now, other things that you'll probably want to do, which I won't show in this video, but just hopefully you have all the tools that you can and that you need to be able to do this, is implement the other actions that you would do on a post, like creating a post, or say retrieving just one post, or updating a post and deleting a post. And you can kind of use the same logic in the sign up and the login views to have a form that you can then submit using the service, and hopefully you can update your post service to have more methods in it, and then the form can collect the data and call that post service to actually create posts and view one post and maybe update a post and delete a post. But you would just create more views in here. You can even on the post page view, you can have a link to view individual posts. And then you'll have to do a little bit more with the router. Other things that you might want to do, as mentioned before, is do some more logic in the index router to make sure they're logged in before they visit this post's path. And you can look at some tutorials on the Vue router that will show you how you can implement some security before visiting, that they're logged in before visiting certain pages. But this is just a good little introduction on how a Vue app would work connecting to an API that runs in the background. And by no means is this intended to be complete or the only correct way of doing things. In fact, I've probably taken quite a few shortcuts to make it a little simpler to understand all the bits and pieces that are going on.